Thanks for having me into your institute today. I'm excited to share about how we do creative community engagement. My agenda, just so you kind of know where I'm going with the conversation, is I just want to spend a quick 3 to 5 minutes on In Common, who we are, just so you have some context. And then I wanted to spend 5 minutes or so on asset-based community development. And then I'm going to kick my dogs outside, depending on how they handle themselves. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my time, 10 or 15 minutes or so, on how we do creative community engagement. So let me handle the dog thing real quick. I had it handled a second ago.
I have a dog too. I'm sure you'll be hearing him as well. That's the beauty of Zoom.
Yeah.
We're all a little more gracious toward background noise.
Yes, we are. Well, I have a puppy, so he's uncontrollable. But anyway, and I recognize so many of you on the screen today, so hopefully this isn't too redundant for those of you who are familiar with In Common, but I'll just do a recap anyway. When we talk about In Common, I like to start from the place of belief. What do we believe? At In Common, we believe that no one should have to face a lifetime of poverty simply because of the zip code that they grew up in or that they were born into. So our mission statement follows: we alleviate poverty at a root level by uniting and strengthening vulnerable neighborhoods. There's two key ideas with the mission statement. One is root level poverty alleviation. We want to stop it at the roots. This year In Common celebrates our 20th anniversary, which means that we have a few miles behind us in terms of experimenting with different community development tactics. And yeah, I think just over the years, really were, at least early on, challenged by the fact that we'd see some of the same faces day after day, year after year, and what really wanted to figure out how do we stop poverty at the roots, which led us to the second part of the mission: neighborhood level intervention. We know that if we can stop poverty in the neighborhood, if we can change the context in which kids are growing up in, then we can change their future outlook. So that's our mission, and that's our objective. This is the 20,000-foot infographic overview for our organization with our tagline, transforming neighborhoods through neighbors. The operative word in our tagline is through, which is, I think, really apropos to our topic today. We aren't just satisfied with transformed neighborhoods. We want to make sure that our process holds and that the neighborhoods are transforming because of the neighbors themselves. We'll talk a little bit about why that's so important, but for one, it's the sustainable way to do things, right? If we make change on our own, but we're no longer there, who's going to keep that change moving forward? And so you can see kind of this utopian neighborhood that we're shooting for. The way that we get there is we build up neighborhood leadership. So those are the folks with a cape on there, and we build their capacity through workforce development, affordable housing, adult education, relationship building, the like. So we programize those things, push it through leadership development, get people active to create a new neighborhood for themselves. And here are our handles. We'd love to stay in contact with you. Today, again, I'm just going to take 5 minutes here and there to talk about topics that are really, for us, hour-long conversations. We do trainings on all of this. So if anything I've talked about today sparks an interest, look us up, and we'd love to invite you to a future training. So I thought a good way to get the conversation started, I didn't want to just jump straight into the techniques and tactics we use without giving it a little bit of context for why we do what we do. And I know a lot of my colleagues today will be sharing based on the same principles of asset-based community development that I'm about to share now, but just wanted to make sure if you weren't already familiar with that term, you had some context. And for me, a helpful way to think about asset-based community development is to think about the type of neighborhood that we want to develop as a result of our work. There's more than one neighborhood that we can develop, and there's more than one way to skin a cat. So let's figure out what we want to see in the end, and then reverse engineer our work to fit that overall objective. And the way I see it, there's at least two routes to do community development. There's more than this, but I think the basic sort of black and white is the two different routes: traditional community development and asset-based community development. So if we're using the tool of traditional community development, really, I think what we're after is a rehabilitated community. This has a lot to do with the bricks and mortar of the community, the physical components of a community. There are certainly some social dynamics that emerge as a result of some of these transformational changes, but by and large, it's sort of making a neighborhood shiny and new. And we can get there through traditional community development. However, if we're looking for something a little bit beyond that, and I think it's hard to categorize this or give this a one-word definition. You might call it an empowered community and a vibrant community, but it's really one that has a lot of these characteristics of a rehabilitated community. But there's a sense of community action and engagement and ownership and pride because the neighbors themselves are part of the process. The trade-off with asset-based community development, just to be fair, straight out of the gate, is that it's a much slower process. It's much more difficult to organize people around the neighborhood transformation than just doing it yourself. But these are the benefits you get, I believe, if you take this particular process known as asset-based community development, or ABCD in short. What definition for ABCD? It's a strategy for sustainable community-driven development that shifts the focus from community needs to community capacities. It's a way to find and mobilize the gifts of a community and engages local citizens in the work of making their own neighborhood strong. So again, if we had more time and we were going through the full conversation of ABCD, we would contrast this definition with a traditional form of community development, the definition for that. And I think what would stand out to you are a couple things. One, traditional, whereas asset-based focuses more on the community capacities, the gifts, the talents of the community. Traditional focuses more on the challenges or the deficits. Traditional is looking to identify what's wrong with the community and how do we fix it. And ABC is looking more in terms of what are the strengths of the community and how can we leverage them. The other thing I'd mention is that traditional focuses more on bringing outside experts into the work of community development to make a neighborhood strong. ABCD is really focused on leveraging the existing neighbors and leadership of a community, starting with that place of existing human resource. So those are some of the basic contrasts between traditional and ABCD. Cormac Russell, who's an ABCD thinker, puts it really plainly: start with what's strong, not what's wrong. And we're in Omaha, so we're all familiar. Oh, I don't know if we all are. So that was an assumption. Maybe you're not, but we're probably, most of us are familiar with the Gallup Strength Finders. It really reminds me of the Gallup Strength Finders version of community development. Instead of identifying all the challenges that we have to face and all the potholes that we need to fill, so to speak, we look at what is strong and we leverage that towards the community's success. One of the starting places with asset-based community development is reframing the way that we look at our community. So how do we map the assets of our community? And I think mapping the assets is both a tactical sort of pencil and paper process, but it's also just changing the framework and the lenses in which we see the community. So a traditional approach would be to see some of the challenges in the community here, either geographically, these are where some of the challenges are located geographically, or just start to bunch up and assemble all of the challenges that a community might face. From an asset-based approach, you do an asset map, and you reframe both with your lenses and with your physical inventory, either taking a big old map and putting it on your wall and starting to write down and pinpoint where these strengths are, or like maybe like an Excel list, but you're doing that and you're just changing the way that you're visualizing the community so you can start to identify easily and quickly the strengths of the community. And when people do asset mapping, they typically are looking at 4, 5, 6 different assets of the community. And I know Spark, and particularly I learned a lot of this from Jamie in terms of the holistic approach to community development. So there's so you might already be familiar with this approach of typology of finding out what are the strengths of the community. But asset number one for us is the local residents, or what we sometimes call the gift bearers. And we're going to focus our time, or at least my time with you today, on this particular bubble, but I wanted to highlight a couple others. Asset number two are associations. Essentially, these are the gift bearers bundled up in groups, actively doing some sort of work, or actively meeting around some sort of passion. This is really, quite honestly, where the magic happens, but we have to go through a couple other processes that we'll talk about today before we can get people into these associations of work. Third is our institutions. So where are the schools, the churches, the the nonprofits, starting to categorize those. And then the physical surroundings is also a common element. The built environment, the natural environment. Other assets that you might include in this list are the cultural assets of the community, the exchange of the community, what kind of commerce is happening either economically or through a barter system. So these are some of the ways that we can start to visualize and bring into our mentality the strengths of the community. So that's just the overview, a little quick thumbnail overview of asset-based community development. I wanted to go in a little bit more depth in terms of some of the more practical things that we do at InCommon to practice at ABCD in regard to creative community development. So we're going to look again at asset number one, gift bearers. The question becomes, well, if local residents are a primary asset in the neighborhood, how do we identify them and how do we engage them and how do we get them moving forward to create community change? Tool number one I wanted to briefly touch on is called block connecting. We learned quite a bit about block connecting from a group in Edmonton, Canada, that does block connecting on a citywide scale. But essentially block connecting is identifying point people on particular blocks. So you're democratizing and sharing the leadership in the community. So you don't have to own all the relationships yourself. You're recruiting people to really hold that position and share in that role. And so there's three roles that I'll talk about with block connecting. One is the organizer, the person that kind of is leading the initiative and making sure everybody's headed in the right direction. Then you have the block connector themselves, the local resident who's in charge of connecting their block. And then you have the gift bearers, the local residents. So those are the ones that we're going to continue to follow through along this pathway. For us, just if it's helpful, when we think about blocks and we think about community engagement, we're thinking about facing blocks. So not a square block, not the people who live behind you or behind the alley from you, but the people that you face and hopefully or preferably terminated by an intersection on each side. Not all blocks are as clearly defined as that, but that would be a nice clear-cut block for us. So let's talk about the organizer. The organizer recruits, coaches, and supports the block connectors. So these are the people that really help to equip the connectors on each of the blocks. They're generally a paid position, but depending on your context, maybe this is you. Maybe you're just working on a block or two and you can be the one that's really enlisting the block connectors to get moving in the community. Ideally, this is a neighbor. In fact, ideally with everything in terms of asset-based community development, you're working with neighbors or there are neighbors leading the effort. And skills are organizing, leadership, facilitation, preferably some sort of bilingual or multilingual skills so you can engage a broad subset of leadership. Which then takes us to the connector. The connector is now, again, the person that's going to be doing the actual engagement on their block. Specifically, they'll meet, listen to, and befriend the gift bearers. They're going to get to know their neighbors, and they're going to be the ones that are starting to formulate these relationships with some, with a real purposeful sort of role that they're given, not just kind of an ad hoc. We all hopefully are good neighbors, but this person really is given a specific role to do that. Volunteers, residents of the block. And they don't necessarily need to be a leader, at least how we typically identify a leader to be, where they're sort of moving people in a particular direction. These are just people who have great relational skills and just naturally connect well with their neighbors. And then finally, you have the gift bearers, you have the residents. So hopefully this overarching infographic helps you to see it all come together. You have the conductor or the organizer who enlists the block connectors, who deploys the block connectors on their own block, and now is starting to develop relationships with their neighbors individually. So that's a block, that's called block connecting. For the second and last tool that I wanted to share with you guys today, the question then remains, what's a great way or the best way for these block connectors to begin to do that work of getting to know their neighbors and enlisting some of the gifts and talents of their community? Which leads us to the conversation of what we call the listening project. And I know I'm going fast, but I think it's basic stuff, right? You recruit people to do connections around their block, and then you teach them and equip them to be able to do good listening and neighboring. But this is all couched within the community organizing circle, because we don't just listen to people, right? We actually are listening for a purpose. If community engagement isn't just about making sure that we've met someone and we've even heard someone or affirmed someone, it's now stewarding what we've heard and who we've met into a process of creating change. So listening is the first part of the community organizing circle. Then you organize people collectively. You bring people together in these associations or groups. Then you act. You figure out what you're going to pursue in terms of the strategic action. You then celebrate, reflect, and then you listen again. So just a brief touch point on how listening fits in with the broader scope of community engagement, and specifically community organizing. So again, we're going block to block, recruiting neighbors to be a part of, more actively involved in their neighborhood. Or maybe we're using a different technique outside of block connecting, but we just want to take it upon ourselves or take a different approach to getting to know the gift bearers in our neighborhood. The listening approach, the listening project is one approach or tool that you can use for that. So what is the listening project? It's a ongoing deep listening exercise with area residents that helps identify resident and neighborhood assets, local leadership, and promising ideas for strengthening the neighborhood. Back in, I think it was 2008, we found and contracted a group in North Carolina called the Rural Southern Voices for Peace, who have been doing listening project work since the 1970s, and we had them come down to teach us their Jedi ways of listening. So and over the course of history, we've adapted it and modified it to specifically fit the type of work that we do. But we've really learned a lot from that group in terms of how to not just do a survey with people, but really get to know them and understand where they're coming from. So in terms of the purpose for the listening project, it's the first step in building a relationship. It's not primarily to gather data. I think that we'll see some of this. We see this oftentimes with asset-based community development. I mentioned it during our asset mapping discussion. We're typically wired with a deficit approach. What are the problems in a community? And we're also wired with a problem-solving approach, right? We want to identify the problems. We want to fix the problems. And we also, I think, are really driven sort of in terms of like a survey approach. We gather data, we identify problems, and we fix it. The asset-based community development is really asking us to re-envision and reimagine the way that we approach communities from a place of relationship. And so we encourage people doing the listening project, don't be tempted to use this as a tool for primarily gathering data, which you will gather data from this, but use it as a step in building relationship, which is also why we love to couple this with our block connecting program. What a better person to hold that relationship than an immediate neighbor. It's great if a community organizer wants to do this, but that really puts the community organizer in place what they own and manage a lot of different relationships. We want to build real meaningful relationships. B, the purpose is to uncover assets, the person you're listening to and the community's assets. Again, not to uncover needs. I've seen as I've done some training in the listening project, there seems to be a natural leaning again towards changing the questions from an asset approach to a needs-based approach. Let me ask you about what's wrong here. This is really to uncover the strengths. And then you want to tap into the speaker's passions and motivations for change, not our strategy. So this isn't a recruiting tool to get people on your team to create the change that you envision. Community Organizing 101 is to identify their self-interest, their motivations and passions, and you want to make sure that the listening project accomplishes that. I don't know if this is helpful for you to be able to see it from a different perspective, but listening for is really what I see as a needs survey. So you're listening for people so that you can use that information to make change on behalf of people. The listening project is more a listening with. It's shoulder to shoulder, really being a part of the community, so that you can develop relationships and move people in a direction of empowerment. The listening project structure, just a little brief overview of that. There's 3 people. It's the person you listen to, the person that does the interviewing or asks the questions, and the recorder. The recorder is the person that's taking notes. It's helpful if the person who's engaging the conversation doesn't also have to write down notes so that they can be fully present in it. And for us, we have modify the listening project so that it's a two-part piece for us. So we do an intro section. Sometimes we call it the short session, and then a long session. Essentially, and I'll talk a little bit how we do community engagement around these two sessions, but because it's a conversation, it's really difficult just to run into someone and say, hey, you have 45 minutes that we can just sit down and talk. The intro session allows you to sort of start the conversation and cue yourself up for future times with them. And if it's helpful, we use a app called Typeform. It's a personalized, customizable product that you can put your questions in, and then it records. You can record them on site, just in your iPhone or whatever you're using. It populates that into a database, and you can run different analytics with it. And I also wanted to share our listening project form in its entirety at this URL, tiny.cc/I hear you. Feel free to mess around with that. We have a separate URL for our own data, so you won't mess this up if you want to go in there and play around with it. The only thing we'd ask is if you do play with it and you do like it and you just do want to use it, we would love to invite you to a full form of our listening project training so that we can give you the rest of the techniques that we don't cover today. So I mentioned there's an intro section, a short section, and then a long section. The short section is really about the person you're listening to. So here's the majority of the questions that you'd be asking through this. One is, let's see, what are you good at? So, I mean, this is such a great way to start a conversation, right? Like typically people ask what's something you want to fix in this community? What's broken? What needs repair? The first question, you set up a relationship by saying, what are you good at? And this really throws people for a loop in a really positive way. It's a really humanizing approach. We've even seen, sort of a shock and close to tears as we've asked these questions before. Is there something you'd be willing to share with others? What are you passionate about? What's one way you think you could use this passion to strengthen the neighborhood? So, I mean, even the first two questions, like you can do so much with that, right? What are you good at? And is this something you'd be willing to share with others? Immediately, you have some incredible information on how to potentially bring people together around a common cause. Then at the end of the short section, there's a break point where it sets up a question of, do you have time for more? Is this something that you'd like to continue to do now, or can we set up a time to do the long session later? Probably don't call it the long session because you don't want to scare them away, but it really allows that transition point so you can schedule a meeting with them in the future. These are some pictures of what this looks like to do a short session. You can do a short session in any format, a block party. This happens to be what we called a outdoor living room parlor. So we got a piano, we got some fancy old furniture and an area rug, and we set up a living room so people, as they're walking down the street, we could bring them over and have a conversation with them, serve them a glass of lemonade, and do the listening project. So just a creative approach to doing listening. This is really helpful in a more institutional setting as well. Maybe it's a school or a church, but it doesn't take a lot of time. So you can just sit people down and get to know them from that short form questionnaire. You can do door to door. So we're getting into the season where people are going to be sitting on their stoops. This is a great way to step up and just have a brief conversation with people and let them know it's not a survey. You just wanted to ask them some questions about who they are and their thoughts on the neighborhood, and you're hopefully a neighbor yourself, so it creates that bond. And then we built a little thing we call the listening booth. It reminds me of Lucy's advice booth, but we can set this up on street corners. We've put it in a panaderia before. Laundromats, you can just put this anywhere that people are naturally coming in and out. Laundromats are fantastic, by the way, because people have to sit there while their wash is getting done anyway. But this is just, listening project obviously is very mobile, and you can do that 5-minute session really anywhere. Here's some of the questions from the long session. I won't go through them because I did share that URL with you, but here's just a sampling. Do you feel like you belong here? Why or why not? Do you have stories that you can share about this neighborhood? The listening project is really built around a tool or a concept called appreciative inquiry. And so we're not the fuller training would go through why this is not just a survey, but we really want to encourage people to tell us stories about their responses. So for instance, when we ask people what their favorite part about Park Avenue is, which is one of the neighborhoods we work in, oftentimes we'll hear the response, Hanscom Park. And we can't, there's not a lot you can do with that, just that short one phrase response. So the next question is, well, tell me about a time when you were in Hanscom Park that was really meaningful to you. Who were you with? What was the day like? What was the weather like? What was the activity that you're doing? Why did it mean so much to you? Take me there. And that's really the way that is ideally approached in the listening project, isn't just to get one word responses, but to get people to move their responses from their head to their heart. To conclude, at the end of the listening project, we, for our data purposes, will record not only their responses, but we'll also jot down a quick Likert response in terms of their connection to the community, as well as their level of passion. We can do a lot if people are connected and have passion, even if we're having trouble connecting the dots on what their particular interests are. If people say that they're super interested in cats, I'm sure you have good ideas on how to engage people in the neighborhood based on cats, maybe a cat club or something. But I mean, if they're passionate, like we can get them engaged with a lot of things beyond what they specifically said during that conversation. So we jot down sort of their level of passion and connection. And then the listening project establishes the 3 basic building blocks for community organizing. Relationships are forming, gifts are being discovered, and motivations or self-interest are being uncovered. So so much rich material comes out of that we can use, again, going back to the community organizing circle in the process of not just hearing people, but mobilizing them towards community change. So I did not have my stopwatch going. I hope that didn't go too long. Here's the information. Okay. It's okay. Okay, good. Here's the information if you want to get in contact with us again. And yeah, I think at the end of this, we have some time potentially for questions, so we can hit those then.
Yeah, I'd ask you to hold on to your questions, folks in the audience. We need to get to Turner's presentation so he can hop off here. But Christian, if you're able to stick around, that would be awesome. Thanks so much for this great information and a good overview of the model of community development that we are trying to bring forward in our community. Turner, you want to hop on?
Yeah, thank you, Christian. When I first started my job here in Council Bluffs, I think I actually went to go sit down with Christian before I even started, because I was like, what am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. So I highly recommend getting connected with him if you're starting from the ground up. My name's Turner Morgan. I'm the neighborhood coordinator here at 712 Initiative in Council Bluffs. I'm going to give you just a quick high level of what we do and some of the practical things we're doing in our town. And I guess we'll go from there. I'll have to my beach hair is going on because I'm currently in Amelia Island. I woke up and Angela's like, whoa, I went for a bike ride this morning. So anyway, so forgive that, if you will.
We're just happy to have you. Thanks for taking time on your vacation to be with us.
No, I figured all these people here are doing something cool, so I'm happy to be here. I look forward to meeting you all at some point. So 712 Initiative, can everyone see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay. How about this one?
Yep, we can see it.
All right, very cool. So 712 Initiative was a merger of a lot of smaller nonprofits here in Council Bluffs, really focused around live, work, and play and quality of life in Council Bluffs. So we do built environment projects, which Lynn Dittmar, my coworker, is here, and Cheryl Garst. They do like our community or our redevelopment projects, like the physical big buildings, which I've learned a lot as this has been going on. So here's a few examples of the buildings and projects. I just encourage you to go to our website. I was putting together a PowerPoint. I'm like, what am I doing? This looks awful. Just go to the website. So please feel free to kind of cycle through some of the projects. The 712 Initiative brand's relatively new. The merger happened just a handful of years ago. so Potawatomi County Development Corporation is what we're known to the IRS for, and then we rebranded. So these are some of those redevelopment projects. To couple that, we do programming around the downtown in our central focus area. So we have like a farmer's market, the block party trailer, which is one of my programs I'll talk about in a little bit. We have a community garden program. We have an Adopt a Street year-round cleanup program, Celebrate CB, which is sort of the parade and the hometown pride stuff. So you have that built environment, you have the programming around it, and then I do quite a bit of community engagement work through our neighborhood work. So this is kind of where I guess I'll just jump into some of the tools we use to engage our neighborhood. So Council Bluffs, there's probably 4 or 5 active neighborhoods of different capacities. And we're really trying to find, you know, when Christian's talking about those local leaders or those gift givers, you know, in the other areas of town. And so before I'd started this job, Arvada, Colorado had this cool thing called a block party trailer. And I just thought it would be easy to, we call it our Trojan horse. So folks, it's a party in a box. It's got everything you need from tables and chairs and games. It's really digestible and easy to understand. We worked really hard hand in hand with the city to get a street closure permit. Before the block party trailer, you had to get $1 million insurance form to close the street. And, you know, and if you're Betty down the street, you're not going to do that. So when folks check this out, it comes with that liability covered. It's got roadblocks. And again, it's a party in a box and an easy way to get people out of their homes and connecting. And so that is our Trojan horse to start to get to know people in our neighborhood. With COVID striking up, we launched a backyard movie night, which was exactly what it sounds like. We had worked with a local neighborhood to do these movies in the park last summer with some grant money we had. And we figured we'd use the equipment we were buying to be a community good. So now neighborhoods can check this equipment out to host, you know, parties in their own backyard, again, to get to know one another. It's great for me because I've been handling all the handoffs or the deliveries or whatever the coordination might be. So it's a great way, again, to meet people where they are, strike up that conversation. Probably not an in-depth listening session like Christian's talking about, but it's definitely a great first step to sort of get a feel for who is in these neighborhoods and if there's someone with some leadership capacity and want to, you know, go a little farther. What else here? So those are 2 of the main programs I've been in charge of. We also launched, so my background's with Habitat for Humanity in Omaha, came to Council Bluffs where I'm from to a chance to serve in my own neighborhood. And there's a huge need, as with any community, for housing. So we did a couple things to sort of get some data. I'm afraid it was more of the listening for. That's something, I guess, as a, you know, criticism to our organization, we can do a better job of listening with. Just what are some of the concerns so we can develop a case to launch our housing program. And so some of the biggest things were property conditions, rental to ownership ratio, and social connectedness. So again, those block party trailers and the backyard movie night program is a great way to kind of start creating that social connectedness. So, and then with the other 2, we had to collect that data. One way was the GIS program. We hired an intern from UNO to help us with essentially a windshield survey, which we merged with the assessor data. And we were happy to say that there were only a few discrepancies from what we were seeing from the curb to the assessor's data. And we mapped that out and really to just show decision makers, like, is there a pocket of poverty somewhere? But what we did find is that it's kind of speckled throughout our community. So in tandem with that, my task was to complete 100 interviews with neighbors in that central and west corridor. And so here's, I guess, where I'll get to best practices, right? Meet people where they're at. This is very practical. You probably already know this. I can't tell you how much more relaxed and just eager to share information and have a conversation when I went to a garage sale. Maybe that's like the one nugget today, but if you're doing some sort of social engagement, garage salespeople, you know, I'm buying something at the table. I want to talk to them, and chances are I get, you know, 10 or 20 people going on a conversation. The second one, when I was doing this type of work, was hydrant parties. So our fire department's great. They do, you know, they open up the hydrant. Kids are having a good time. Families are down there in the neighborhoods that they live. I set up a table. You get a popsicle if you come and talk to me, or even you just can have one and let's just start a conversation. So once again, just meet people where they're at. I can't stress that enough. When we finally kind of got this data together, if you will, to present and do some fundraising to launch our program, we wanted to recruit neighbors. So the program itself is we're essentially taking that vacant property or that worst house on the block, purchasing it, stabilizing the neighborhood so it doesn't transfer into a poor rental, and then selling it for affordable home ownership, right? So in tandem with that, we wanted to help neighbors around those properties with, you know, getting some volunteers down and helping them, giving them a hand up, which is something that I'm used to. I have at Omaha, like, hey, what's that project you could do with, you could use 10 extra hands for? We sent letters, we did social media, we did newspaper ads. None of those really got a response, but what did get a response is when you leave a flower at their door. So again, this is a very practical thing. We left a little door hanger with a rose. I think it was Good Neighbor Day. That little touch kind of put a personal touch on it. Maybe gave them enough comfort to call me and have that discussion about, you know, a project we might help them with. So again, that's nothing like mind blowing, but I can't stress enough just being as personable as possible and meeting people where they are when you are approaching this neighborhood type work. I think that's kind of the gist of what I had to share. Lynn, my coworker Lynn's here if she wants to jump in at all. These are some of the homes, I guess. Here's some of the data. Again, you should just jump onto the website and scroll through if you want to see what we're up to. I can tell you, so there was a neighborhood job that popped up in Omaha that I had applied for, but when this opportunity came up, it just made so much more sense because this is where I'm from. So again, just finding those local leaders like that are invested in it gives a sense of authenticity, which I don't think I could have done otherwise over in Omaha. I mean, I love our metro area, but it's been so great to just work in and around the town that I'm from. So
I would add real quick, just kind of another layer is, like Turner's working at this house with volunteers, and they're starting to, demo some things, but he's also out talking to the neighbors, letting the neighbors know why we're there, what our intent is, what our outcome is, what we want to do. And that helps gain that neighborhood support, helps us get to know the people, learn their stories, learn the story about the house. It's just another way to engage. It's fun and easy. So it's totally in Turner's wheelhouse. That's his thing. So
I know you have to jump off the call, Turner. I did want to ask one quick question if you have time.
Yeah, please do. And you've got my information, so I'm so sorry that I have to hop off.
No,
but
I'm just curious, have you ever come across somebody who is like, why are you doing this here? We don't want you working here. That typical, like, not in my backyard kind of situation. And how do you work through that? Or have you not had that?
Experience with neighbors, because we are strategically trying to find an eyesore. So people are usually excited, and they're excited to share stories of the homeowner that used to live there and maybe contacts nearby. We have had a little bit of I don't want to call it confrontation, but you know, local landlords are concerned that we're eating up some sort of market share about what we're doing. So we're actually trying to get an audience with them. I think there's a local landlord association to help them understand that, one, there's enough work for everybody in our town. I think there's over 700 dilapidated homes in our community. And then two, we really just raise the values and connectedness wherever we're working. So I think it's a net positive, and I think it's a part of education is just a key component that I think we're still working on. Our brand's relatively new, but I think we're getting some good momentum and traction. So I hope everyone's on board, because we're not stopping. So yeah.
That's great. Well, thanks so much for presenting to us today, Turner. I'm going to drop your contact information into the chat box and then make sure everybody has it over email tonight. We are going to welcome next our friends from Canopy South, Crystal and Cesar.
Hi, everyone. I will pull up the presentation. Just give me one sec. All right, Cesar, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. I recognize a lot of faces, a lot of names for those that don't have the camera on. Thank you, Angela, for the invitation to share a little bit about our organization and also about all the efforts when it comes to community engagement. So really quick, what we're gonna do here, I'm gonna just get a quick summary of who we are, what we do, and then Crystal will jump in and help us more in depth in everything that is related to all the efforts with the community engagement. So who we are, legal name is Southside Redevelopment Corporation. As you can tell by the name, that's nothing exciting, nothing that gets you jump out of your chair or anything like that. And more important, it's a name that in the community was taken as we're a corporate trying to get something out of them. And that's absolutely not what we want to do and not the desires from our organization. Instead, we want to bring as much as we can and leave as much as we can in the field. So Canopy South is our new name. We do business as Canopy South. We love the logo. It just in a way represents a lot of what we are in terms of diversity in colors. You see kind of a map there. So pretty cool. We like it. I'm very proud of that. So continuing on this. So Canopy South, our main goal is basically breaking the intergenerational cycle of poverty. That means bringing not only the housing aspect, but everything that is necessary and required by the community to be thriving. We know that in the past, there's been many efforts that only focus on the housing, and we realize now that that's a failure. I mean, I can talk in the big scale of things like what the housing authorities through the country have been trying to do, where they focus solely on the housing aspect. What we're trying to do is a holistic approach to all the needs, to supply for all the needs that a community has, and be very careful when we work with this community that we tailor to be able to respond to the unique needs, right? Communities, depending on the cultural background, their race, their history, are different through a city, more through the country. So why we operate in the area where we are? Many of you have seen this map before, and I can go through history and explain more about Red Line it is. I'm pretty sure you're all very well aware of that. But just to give you an idea, we are basically operating right there on where you have the letter D in the south area. that was part of the redlining. Those were communities that were relegated to have opportunities only in certain areas. They were not able to apply for loans based on the Muslim race. And I can talk a lot about redlining. That is not the purpose of this meeting, but I just wanted to make sure that we understand that the reason we exist is direct response to historical inequalities that have been, part of our system. So a little bit more about our neighborhood. It's one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the city, I will say, even in the state. You have, of course, what is well known, the Hispanic community. About 50% of the residents of this specific area are Hispanic. But we also need to consider that in the public housing, which is right there in the map, you get to see is kind of the area with the blue outline. That is the public housing units, and about 50% of the residents there are African refugees. Not to count also Southeast Asia and other refugees that are part of this complex. It is not only African refugees means that they all speak the same language. They actually have different religions, different languages, different dialects, different cultures. And then if you put on top of that, the Hispanic community by itself is very diverse, then you are finding that you have about 20, 30 cultures interacting every single day in this community, and about 14 to 17, depends who you ask, different languages that are spoken. With that comes also the big needs that some of these communities have in terms of cultural assimilation, education, and having a great opportunity that we're hoping to provide for them to be successful in the future. So many of these families, by the way, are first Americans. I mean, some of their parents were the first generation in this country, and then some of these kids are now the first generation of Americans. We can talk more about the poverty, but of course, that's part of all the issues that come along with the redlining and many years of inequality that were experienced by this community. So Canopy South, in what we're looking for a model that we could implement in the community, specifically here in South Omaha. We did our research, and we basically, after many discussions and conversations with different organizations around the country, we realized that the purpose-built community was the best model for us to implement. And we have to say that there's another organization here, 75 North, who's been very successful implementing this plan. And that made a great impact for us when we were making the decision. Not only they have what we're looking for when it comes to the housing aspect and mixed income housing, but they also have two big buckets that are as important, which is cradle to career, meaning early childhood education all the way to career ready when the kids graduate from high school, and community vibrancy, which is the bucket where we include everything else from transportation, mobility, healthcare, you name it. It goes in vibrancy, which is the basically kind of the glue of all the aspects that we have in our community, social services. What we're trying to do is specifically community vibrancy is that we know we cannot tackle 100 things at a time, but we need to focus on the 5 or 6 that are more important for this community to be thriving. That means that perhaps those efforts that we're having here in terms of, giving example, transportation might not be the same in a different purpose-built community in other parts of the country. And this is kind of the area where we are able to tailor to the community that we're serving. So mixed income housing, it's important for us to discuss that here with developers. What we're trying to do is basically provide 1/3 affordable low income housing, 1/3 affordable housing and 1/3 market housing. That through a lot of research and experiences that we had studied through different communities in the country, we find this model to be the best. You know, when you provide housing only for subsidized, in this case, what you're going to have is communities that are way below the poverty line, and that it's hard for them to find help between the families, right? When you are able to bring into one community the mixed income housing program, what it does is that allows for those families and that perhaps are less verbal in many ways in education and socioeconomical status to be able to connect with a different layer that allows them to all together come out, afloat with more resources. This is something that it does not only depend on the physical aspect of providing housing, it depends also, once again, on the social fabric that we're trying to create. Cradle to Career, as I explained before, is just basically from early childhood education and all the way to when the kids are ready to make a decision and when it is their choice. We're not talking that anyone here is required to go on a 4-year degree. It might as well just be 2 years, or might as well just get a technology that allows them to go to a workforce. What we're trying to provide is that choice. That is not mandated that you don't have the resources, you don't have the support to go to college. We're trying to provide all that. But once again, it's about choice. And that is a big opportunity for this community, that it doesn't necessarily be mandated by the socioeconomic status or by the status of the family or by the resources that I have available. And community vibrancy, that is, as I say, kind of the glue, that's including culture, social services, healthcare, mobility, transportation, all of those things that make a community great, and that we also have to take into consideration where we're trying to provide housing. All that is integrated in the whole master plan. So before I give it to Crystal, I want to express here how maybe this might be different from what you hear today, but this is a great big development that we're trying to do, where people already live there in this community. There is no vacant land. The process that we're trying to carry out will require some relocation. It's a community that has been there and there's history since the 1940s. And we need to come very careful, acknowledge the history that they have, the diversity that they have, the opportunities that they have, and all the achievements that they already have, and we need to enhance that. We're not coming here to change, to mandate, or to tell them what to do. Everything needs to come from them, from their voice, from what they want to see in this community. So when we're talking about community engagement, we're taking that very serious, because this is the foundation and of everything we're doing. Our success will depend 100% on the participation of all the members of this community. And then we're talking about from the minimum things about how they want the sidewalks, how wide they need to be, all the way to what types of transportations they need to come into this community or they would like to see. It is a hard process because the truth is that we are outsiders. We have not lived in this community. We have done our best to get a good understanding of what they have, but it is important for us to recognize that at some point we might be even biased on what we think is best for them. And that is not the case, and that's not what we want to do here. It needs to be, once again, 100% the feedback from the community was taken into consideration for the final plan. So that is a big part of what we're doing right now. before we have any master plan, before we put anything on the map, before we able to even dictate or be able to propose what the built environment will look like, that we carry a good program where we're able to provide a space for everyone in the community to have a voice, to voice their concerns, to tell us their feedback, and ultimately to make sure that each of them see themselves represented in the final plan that will be to be presented. So with that, Crystal is our project manager. She's been doing a great job getting to the community, being very creative, and through COVID has been done an excellent effort to make sure that the ball didn't stop and continue things moving. As you can imagine, that's very challenging, and I'm very proud of what we've done and happy with all the work that Crystal has been able to accomplish. So Crystal, with that, can take it from here.
Thanks, Cesar. I think Cesar mentioned a really interesting point. And when we were talking about community engagement, our approach is very similar to Christian's ABCD model. We particularly look at community engagement using a model called trauma-informed community building. I highly recommend looking into it. It's just understanding that the neighborhoods that we serve, at least here at Canopy South, have gone through a lot of trauma, a lot of historical trauma, and live in poverty every single day. And for us to be outsiders, like Cesar said, come in and say, we're going to make things great. The model basically says that the easiest part of the redevelopment project tends to be the physical development. It's not too hard to build a nice building. The long-term, most difficult part is building a community, and a community that is buying into any development. So like Angela said, when she kicked us off this morning, you know, we want to make sure that we're engaging with the community now, working with them, listening to them, and creating a development that is reflective of their needs rather than having a development and then trying to get resident buy-in. So with that, I'm just going to talk very briefly about some of the community engagement that we've done. I'm going to preface that this was pre-COVID pictures. We kind of kicked off our engagement efforts in the fall of 2019. You can see Angela here helping us at a park kickoff. It was like a fun park party. We had food trucks and music and jumpy inflatables. This was just really like an outreach event to let everyone know we received a grant. We're going to be creating a plan, and that was really fun. And then in February of 2020, we really kicked off more traditional community engagement efforts of like larger public meetings. I want to say the one major thing that we learned here is really understanding the community that we serve. We thought we were doing the best thing ever by doing a presentation, and then we're going to break out into small groups. And then all of a sudden, about half of the room got up and started leaving. And we were all like, oh my gosh, what did we say? What did we do? We did not recognize that was prayer time. And a lot of individuals left to go pray. Once they were done praying, they came back. But just understanding the neighborhood and their needs, culture, and religion is super, super important when doing community engagement. Then there's this thing called COVID that happened in the middle of our community engagement efforts. We kind of, like I'm sure all of you in our work lives, kind of had to put a pause and really start to rethink how we approach our community engagement, how we still make contact in a safe way. So we did some outdoor block talks. If you're not familiar with block talks, they're essentially gathering neighborhood leaders, walking a route and talking about some of the assets in the neighborhood, trying to build off some of those assets, and then also identifying some areas for improvement. And here in this picture on the left, you can kind of see us at a vacant lot and kind of just envisioning if we could activate this space? What could it be? What would it look like? What do we want? And so we have some of the neighborhood association presidents, tenant association presidents, and just trying to interact in a safe way. I think that was really great. And I think there's a good balance of having larger group meetings when possible, but also having smaller, intimate conversations with neighborhood leaders is super helpful and insightful. We have Cesar modeling on the right for us at our community garden that we activated this vacant land that we own. This was really great for workforce development. We had some youth and partnered with Latino Center of the Midlands and Big Garden. We had several raised beds. Students were paid to do this internship program, and we harvested a lot of fresh food for the neighborhood. And then, we really thought COVID was going to be like a 3-month thing. And then so we had to get even more creative. And similar to like what Christian was saying earlier, is like, how do we identify some of these neighborhood leaders? But also, how do we do that in the middle of a pandemic? So one of our resident outreach efforts was this food truck event that we had, not necessarily to solicit any feedback, just to make some personal connections with residents, gauge interest. And this was really used as like a recruitment tool to identify some of the individuals who want to get more involved in their neighborhood, but just aren't necessarily sure how. So that was a really great outreach event. Here on the right, one thing that we have done really well is work with some of the local nonprofits who have been serving this neighborhood for a very long time, like the Simple Foundation and Heartland Workers Center. The photo on the right was taken from an event where we had neighborhood residents really concerned about Upland Park. So we worked with Heartland Workers Center to essentially help support residents lead this event. This was a resident-led event. They met every week to plan it, and they ended up doing a bike walk cleanup at Upland Park, and then they gave us some really good feedback for park improvements. So that was really fun. And then we kind of hit a wall in our creativity. So I went down a rabbit hole that is Google and was just Googling things on interesting, creative ways to get feedback. And I found this chalkboard cube in an article, and I thought it was the coolest idea. So this is for scale 8 foot by 8 foot. It used to live at McGill-Keith Park. This one was really fun because residents on some of the block talks were talking about there's no color in the neighborhood doesn't have a sense of identity. A lot of people aren't hopeful or have, high aspirations in the neighborhood. So we took this as an opportunity to really listen to those concerns. We had a local artist do the public art on one side. We had a really inspirational quote on the other side. And then the 2 other sides were left blank, and we had questions, wrote them in 3 different languages, and invited community members to write their thoughts. My favorite was the artwork from the kiddos. It was really fun just to see what they write. And a lot of them wrote inspirational messages to their neighbors, which was really endearing. On that same rabbit hole of Google, there is a city who decided to, as a city staff, dedicate 10 minutes of their day, every single day, to community engagement. And they did it in a way that was super informal. So every staff member committed to standing outside on the sidewalk for 10 minutes, having informal conversations on the bus, talking to people at the grocery store, and just saying like, hey, I work for the city. We're really interested in improving and what works well. What can we do? How do we support you? So we kind of took that approach, and instead of doing 10 minutes every day, we worked as a group. We all went out for an hour a week, walked Southside Terrace, which is the public housing complex that Cesar was mentioning. And we walked around when it was really nice out and people were hanging out outside, people were coming home from school. And we just really solicited feedback in that way. During COVID, we of course did a bunch of surveys. online mailers. But kind of to Christian's point from earlier, data is really important, but data is one side of the story. And this was a really great way to get some more human feedback from residents and try to fill in the blanks and build some like authentic relationships with neighbors. So that was really fun. And then there's a little thing in Nebraska called winter. And I'm from California, so this winter was extra rough for me. But when the weather started to turn and COVID is still here, we were all kind of getting antsy and wanted to still interact with neighbors. So we did a Valentine's Day pop-up. No one lost a finger from frostbite, but we almost did. We waited until the students were out of school. And the office that we have here is on the walking path to and from the elementary school. So we had Valentine's Day, little goodie bags, and we had the youth vote for some of the projects that they wanted to see. And I thought this was just a really great way to engage with youth because they offer such a unique perspective. And when we're talking about building community, we want to ensure that those voices are included in the plan, and hopefully those youth choose to stay in the neighborhood as we continue to develop. And with that, I think we can pause and we'll take questions at the end. Angela?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute. Yes, I think we'll hold and we'll do the questions at the end. That way you can all kind of chime in. If you do have a question and you want to make sure it gets addressed, feel free to drop it in the chat box now, but we'll circle back to it after we have our last presenter. Thank you, Crystal and Cesar. That was really informative. And wow, those photos feel like a lifetime ago. Anything pre-COVID just kind of like jolts you into alarm when you see that many people gathering so close together. All right, we are looking for Alex. There she is. Thanks for joining us. We're going to turn it over to Alex from One Omaha.
Okay, hi everybody. My name's Alex. I'm the engagement coordinator at One Omaha. I dropped our website there in the chat. And so a little bit about One Omaha is that we seek to create a mobilized community constantly and unapologetically in service of social change. So what we do a lot is supporting community organizers. So to do this, our work is aimed at lowering barriers of entry for folks who seek to create change, developing organizers, and also creating strong partnerships in the civic sphere. So we assist, so some of the like more specific things that we do is that we assist neighborhood groups with the Omaha Neighborhood Grants Program that's put on by the Omaha Community Foundation. We also facilitate visioning sessions for resident-led groups, which is great to just have like a neutral facilitator sometimes. We also offer our Civics Academy and our Neighborhood Leadership Academy for those seeking information and skills to inform their work. So the Neighborhood Leadership Academy would be a lot about kind of like how to run like a neighborhood organization. So fundraising, organizational structure, best practices for community engagement, best practices for communication and outreach. Whereas the Civics Academy is more about how to navigate the city departments. So it'd be about, you know, like how to have your voice heard at say city council meetings or the county board meetings, and then also like who to complain to when you do have a problem to make sure that you're telling the right person that can take care of it for you. And then recently we've started a mini grant for smaller informal groups. So our mini grant has like very few strings attached. And so that's a way for groups that are just getting started to get some money and start to do their work immediately. And then further than that, we're currently developing an online learning management system. So that's something that came out of COVID, was how do we get information to people when we can't meet in person? And, you know, like our Neighborhood Leadership Academy and Civics Academy are like all day events. And most people don't want to be on Zoom all day. So out of that came, I mean, a lot of great things did come out of COVID as far as like seeing blind spots in our outreach. So we're doing this online learning management system now. Or we're putting it together. And so that's a place where folks can find information that's available in those academies, but that's going to be available year round, as well as more detailed information about interesting but somewhat esoteric topics. So things like the city charter and community development block grants, the sort of things that is really good information for neighborhood leaders to have, but is detailed enough that just a quick conversation usually isn't going to do it. And then we're also developing a mentorship program to create networking and peer-to-peer learning opportunities between local organizers. So we really like to support neighborhood-led groups or like resident-led groups, but we also think that, or I guess I should say, and we also think that collaboration is great. And I think that like one thing that we notice a lot of times is that like, oh, this neighborhood group right here has these issues and this neighborhood group 6 blocks over has these issues, so they should collaborate. But also this neighborhood group 7 miles away has a similar issue and they can talk through things and be support for each other as well. So that's what we're hoping to support with our mentorship program. So that's a little bit about what we do. And then next, I just wanted to talk about best practices for engagement. I think that we heard a lot of good practices today and a lot of kind of like the same stuff, which is because that's how you do good engagement, right? So at One Omaha, we think a lot about meaningful engagement. Because there are a lot of times that folks reach out to neighborhood groups and then they'll check that box that we've reached out to this neighborhood group. So now we're going to go forward. And that is something that at like even the planning board, if a developer hasn't had enough engagement with the neighborhood, that's something that the planning board will say, like, we're not going to approve these changes, or we're not going to approve this TIF application until you go and reach out to the neighborhood. Okay, we like that. But if it's just going to be a meeting with the neighborhood, that's not meaningful. So what is meaningful engagement? Meaningful engagement is engagement that starts early, consistently, and is going to incorporate the ideas into the resulting development. If it's not all 3 of those things, it's not meaningful. Sorry. So some of the things when we're talking about early engagement, and I think maybe Christian mentioned this, that meaningful engagement is just going to be slower. And that is just how it's going to be because you're really going to take time to listen. So a couple of things that would help with this is you definitely don't want anything that is going to be outreach after a decision has already been made about what's going to happen isn't going to be meaningful. So you can do all the neighborhood canvassing you want if you're just telling people what's going to happen and saying that they can decide, maybe what the color of the building is going to be. That's not the type of thing that's going to make folks feel like they were included in that decision-making process. So you need to figure out at what point in your process of development you can get together with neighbors to hear their thoughts, opinions, needs, and desires in a timeline that's going to allow you to cost-effectively absorb those ideas into your development. And then another thing that people were talking about is meeting folks where they're at. So people are really busy and holding a meeting can be great, but to ask folks to come to a meeting once or even twice isn't going to get you as much of the feedback that you're looking for. And it's not going to keep people informed on a regular basis. So if you just have 1 or 2 meetings and you kind of call that meeting out of nowhere, what's going to happen is people are going to come to that meeting and they're going to express a lot of things, and it might have nothing to do with the development or whatever you're trying to do. But because it's just one meeting and because it's a neighborhood meeting, people are going to think like, okay, they're going to come and they're maybe going to talk about things that have nothing to do with it. And maybe they will talk about things that do have to do with what your intention is, but it's going to be a little bit defensive. That's how I would go to a meeting, is defensive. If it's my one chance to say what I'm going to say, what I have to say, then I'm probably going to say a lot. So So the thing about like early and consistent engagement and meeting people where they're at is that I think a really great way to do that is to attend community events on a regular basis. So a lot of my background is in like food related kind of community engagement. So I'm really going to focus here on like markets and community gardens. But I really think that markets, like neighborhood markets, are one of the best ways to engage with the community, as well as like festivals. But markets are, I think, the best because they happen on a weekly basis. So it's a sort of thing where you can reach out and you can ask to like set up a booth. A lot of times markets will let you set up a booth without any fee, but if there is a fee, then that's great because you're supporting the neighborhood and it's usually not going to be too much. It's like 25, maybe $50. But if you're able to like set up a booth at a market, then that's a place that you can have that consistent engagement. And if you're planning on doing something in the neighborhood in 2023 and you're able to set up that outreach in 2021 and have your face be, you know, normalized in the neighborhood, not only are you going to get a lot more feedback, you're also going to get the opportunity to observe the neighborhood. And you will get the opportunity to engage with folks who are taking on leadership roles and also folks who are interested. And so kind of figure out like, what is the dynamic in this neighborhood? So now when you go to announce that you're getting ready to do something in the neighborhood, you're going to get more people turning out to that meeting. You're going to get people turning out to that meeting that are ready to engage and ready to talk about things as opposed to feeling like they need to express everything that they might feel is like not what they want. And you're also going to, so you're going to be able to just get that better engagement, better feedback, and like to speak to more open minds. So that's one thing that I think is really great that folks don't really use enough is those market spaces. Festivals are also great, but they're kind of one-offs. So that's why I do think those are great, but I really think that these like regular markets are a great way to engage. And then I also think that from there at that market, you're going to see the other spaces that are going to allow you to engage with the neighborhood. So like I said, you'll see neighborhood leaders, but you'll also interact with other folks who are doing work in the neighborhood. And that kind of leads me to the second reason that I think markets are so great as an engagement space is that you're going to be meeting small business owners in the neighborhood. So I think that's something that's great because I think a lot of times what happens is that I think one thing that comes up a lot of times is people want to see something for them when they see things changing in their neighborhood. And so being able to work with people who are creating things for the neighborhood is going to give you that opportunity to create things for the people living in that neighborhood. And so then just to talk about specific examples of creative community engagement, the market is one, but another thing that I've seen work really well is offering like volunteer opportunities for folks that offer education. So education and a chance to gain skills. So one thing is there's an organization in Omaha called the Free Farm Stand. And so the Free Farm Stand does weekly free produce distributions. And when folks come to the produce distributions, they also can find out about days to volunteer to help grow the food. And so in community gardens, I've seen that community gardens with the free farm stands get like 80% more volunteer engagement than community gardens that don't have that distribution stand there. So I think that there are a lot of folks in Omaha that are interested in doing things to improve their communities. And if they have the opportunity to work with somebody who's interested in doing something for their community, I think that's a great way to get feedback and also to offer something, to get feedback, to get buy-in, and also offer something to the neighborhood. As far as practices to avoid, the number one practice to avoid, I would say, is explaining to neighbors why they're wrong. You definitely don't want to do that. If you're in a situation where folks are telling you why something's not meeting their needs, just listen. And maybe try to figure out how that can help to meet their needs, or maybe even consider like an email or following up with that person, or people who are telling you why that's not going to meet their needs. And then another practice to avoid is not reaching out early enough. That's the number one issue, I think, that makes folks feel unheard, is that they don't feel like they have time. There's a certain amount of anxiety that comes with being told that that there's a meeting next week for something that's happening 2 weeks after that. So those would be the two things that I would say are the practices to avoid. And that's pretty much what I've got for y'all today. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, those are great tips. Thanks, Alex. I think listening is a theme that carried across all of the presentations. So if you don't take away anything else, please take that away from this. I did see one question in the chat box, and then I had another one, but please feel free to ask our guests if you have any questions. Jose, are you still on the line? Do you want to ask your question? I think you had for Christian earlier.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you to everyone. I've learned so much today, so I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. My question was for Christian, just because I know that they have started doing physical development, but it can be open to anyone. How have you managed? I think one of the things that we face in the development process is either engaging the community in the development process too late, or getting bogged down in trying to appease everyone when developing a building, when developing a lot. And so I think my question was just how has InCommon navigated that process to make sure that a development proposal aligns with neighborhood priorities, while also being on budget and not over-promising?
Question. I can offer a little bit, and I think my colleagues probably have a lot to add to that as well. For us, I think it's two parts. One is we started creating neighborhood plans, and I think Sean can speak into that quite specifically as well. But then we can come to an agreement in terms of what we're looking for, in terms of the numbers of affordable units versus market rate units, kind of the cultural components we want to preserve in the midst of development. So I really like starting with the comprehensive neighborhood plan, because it goes beyond your particular project to the larger scale vision for the community. And then we've done some charrettes as well. So we're redeveloping an apartment in Park Avenue that is already built. So there's there's only some things that people can speak into in terms of how it's developed, but we have some community space that we're going to develop in the basement. So we did some charrettes with residents to brainstorm what we'd like to have more specifically in that particular building. So kind of high level, overarching level is the neighborhood plan, more specifically, charrettes inside the building, if they're already developed, has worked for us.
Can you tell what a charrette is for those who don't know?
Sure, yeah. Gosh, I probably shouldn't have used the term unless I can explain it well, but I think it's an interactive, for us, it's been like an interactive process for feedback, similar to a focus group, but with more creative opportunities to, look at different photos, do some drawing, do some correspondence back and forth. And it's typically in a series. So a focus group is oftentimes just a single time together. A charrette is usually a series of a few times together. And
usually out in the community if you can, like walking the space, right?
Yeah, there's that physical.
Possible.
Yes, I think that's a great component of the definition, is like you're actually, in the presence of whatever you're looking to redevelop. So for us, we did the charrette in the space that we were redeveloping, so that people were there, they could see it, they could put their minds in the space.
Do any of our other presenters have any feedback on that? Great question, Jose.
Well, I mean, I might. This is Sean. I'm with 75 North, and going to that question, like everybody presented like great information, but first at 75 North, you can't make everybody happy in the community, so you just have to go into that knowing that you'll always have some naysayers and stuff, people who want different things. But I think what's the main thing is building that trust and that engagement. And just for 75 North, it's a little different in terms of it's more of a transformational build or development that's happened. So we were incorporated in 2010, 2011, and we didn't break ground until 2017. So that's about 6-7 years of just engaging in the community. And so what people have mentioned, Crystal, Christian, Cesar, and when you talk to the community, you need to be aware of the historical context, the cultural context, because they want to see that you have skin in the game. You're not going to come build it, sell the building, and just leave. So that's like kind of stuff you need to be prepared with when you want to propose. Just listen and just show the community that you're in it for the long haul and build that trust factor. So, but again, you're not going to make everybody happy, but if you make the majority of the people happy and you're listening to the community, that's something just to take into consideration.
I think too, if you can offer education around like the decisions like that you're making and opportunities to engage with those decisions, that can help as far as like making everyone happy. Like at least if folks feel like they can go away with like a learning experience. I've just seen that around, for example, like different building designs. So being able to make folks feel like they're part of that process, just in part of that learning process.
It's the other side of listening is feeling heard, right? Any other comments from our panelists?
I will add to it that, coming prepared to these conversations with the community is important. You need to kind of try to understand and be prepared to answer questions. You might only not have a lot of opportunities to interact with them, with the same person every time. And I'm talking about, for example, anytime that we talk about development, it implies that it's going to be increase on the cost of the property, the surrounding property, right? There's going to be evaluation of that. And that means more taxes for the neighbors to be paying. So that's a concern for many. How are you going to tackle that? How are you going to make sure that the community understands that this is beneficial in the long run for them? You might be paying more taxes, but at the end, the equity of your property is also increasing, right? So being prepared for these conversations, being transparent, very important. Being open to say that you don't know the answer, that you're going to find it for them. Try to make sure that you don't step on the boundaries of subject matters that you don't understand well. There's a lot of questions that come to us, for example, that is not in our control, questions that are more for the city, perhaps. And so be able to connect them also with the right source for that information is important. But come prepared, because community will come with a lot of questions, and they don't like to see somebody there saying, I don't know all the time. But be honest when you don't know that.
If there's no other questions, I'm not seeing any in the chat. One question I had is, some of you work in a very specific geography. If any of our emerging developers do own property or are looking to develop near or in your areas, can you share just like your openness or willingness to meeting with them, and how we might be able to make some connections here?
I can start. So we are already, as you can see in some of the pictures, that we already work with Angela and Spark in some of these efforts for community engagement. And Spark by itself, as a group, has been a great support for us. We are planning to continue in with those partnerships. And the goal, the idea is, as we start our creating the master plan, we identify areas that could be possibly taken by small developers that will take full advantage, number one, of being developers in the community or in the neighborhood or in the city of Omaha, but also serves as an opportunity for small developers to get more, their feet wet, basically, and get to, hands-on working on some of these projects. As Sean was saying, this is something that it might be in the next 2-3 years, hopefully not 7 years. That's the goal. We want to go as far as we can, but do it well. But also, absolutely, I'll be happy to meet with anyone that would be interested to be part of this development. We're very proud of the team that we have right now, and we want to make sure that we have room for everyone else that would like to take advantage of this opportunity. It's just throwing a couple numbers there. We're looking possibly about 700 to 900 new units in the neighborhood. All that in the mixed income housing type of scale. But overall would be something between $220 to $300 million when it's all done. Crazy to think about those numbers, and not all that is going to be housing. As a reminder, there's a lot of things that also be done with the schools and transportation and nonprofits and social services and things like that.
Any of our other, Alex, you guys are all over Omaha. And I think Turner jumped off, but I'm sure if you're interested in development in Council Bluffs, 712 would be happy to make some connections for you or have conversations.
I mean, I'll just add one more point. Even though I wasn't on the panel, but also when
Because Sean is an honorary panel member.
No,
Not only is he a Developer Academy graduate, but he lives and breathes this work. Go ahead, Sean.
But I think, like, when we talk about community engagement too, like, or just to be mindful too, or I mean, Cesar mentioned as well, when you're also talking to city people, you're also talking to government officials, public officials, you're talking, so the community as a whole, as in a holistic approach, like, you talk to the neighbors, that's the most important thing you need to do, but you also need to engage everybody around that circle to make effective change. And that's just something that, to be aware of, and that would just help build that trust factor.
You got some applause from that, Sean. Way to go. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat box. So I'm going to give you guys some time back in your day. I want to say thank you to all of our panelists for giving us your time and your talents and your expertise today. We are so fortunate and grateful to call you our partners. And I look forward to many more conversations about this and other topics related to holistic community development in our future. That's my dog destroying something on the kitchen table. That's why I moved him here, so I wouldn't see it. But thank you again to our panelists and to everybody who came today. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the last of this sunshine, and we'll hope to see you at the next deep dive.